Hello, my name is Jonathan Resnick. I am here at FDA in CDER within the Office of Business Informatics, and today I'll be giving our electronic submissions update. I'll be going over electronic submission guidance, what's new, what are the key guidances to be aware of. I'll talk about our technical rejection criteria for study data, which is going into effect this coming September. I'll be going over electronic submission metrics to give you a nice understanding of how submissions are coming into CDER. We'll go over some common eCTD errors and then talk a bit about some frequently asked questions that come into our electronic submissions help desk. Okay, we're going to start out talking about our electronic submission guidance. We've had an eCTD guidance out there for many, many years. It's been binding since 2017 for submission of NDAs, BLAs, ANDAs, and binding for the submissions of commercial INDs and drug master files since 2018. The last time this guidance was updated was back in February 2020. It's revision 7. And back then, the two things that were added is that a particular type of DMF, a type 3, was added to the exemption section. And there was also a new section added on waivers to address the types of submissions that may qualify for a long-term or short-term waiver from the eCTD requirement, as well as instructions on how you would submit such a waiver request. I also want to let you know that starting March 1st in 2022, that older version of Module 1 in the eCTD, that version that uses DTD 2.01, that's no longer going to be supported. So you will need to use the current version of Module 1 that's out there. It's been out there since 2015, and you will need to use it. So that's the version that leverages DTD 3.3. So you will be required to use the latest version of Module 1. Starting March 1st, 2022, you shouldn't have any issue in terms of making sure that your tool vendor's eCTD publishing tool has that version, because that version has been out since 2015. For more information about this, you can see our Federal Register notice, which was put out last year, and there's a link to it here on this slide. Continuing the theme of electronic submission guidance, there is a promotional labeling and advertising guidance. This one is another binding guidance. It became binding on June 24th of this year. And it says that certain submissions have to be in eCTD. And so for CDER, we want to talk about this. The following submission types will be mandatory in eCTD format starting June 24th, 2021, and may only be submitted through the electronic submission gateway. Now, the particular submissions we're talking about here are the 2253s and the accelerated approval pre-submissions. All the other submission types to OPDP here in CDER, they may be submitted in eCTD format, but there's no requirement to do so. So for additional information about this, you can see the OPDP eCTD webpage. There's a link right here on this slide. And you can also send questions directly to that OPDP eCTD help desk. The email address is right here on the bottom of the screen. Our next electronic submission guidance to talk about is the study data guidance, providing regulatory submissions in electronic format, standardized study data. This guidance was recently updated just a few weeks ago. It just has some language that was added in here about public health emergencies. So I do encourage you to take a look at the guidance, look at the change history table to see exactly what has been added in there. An important thing to know about this guidance in general is that it says that sponsors must conform to standards in the FDA Data Standards Catalog, and it talks about, in particular, when you're submitting a study, it matters when the study started for this requirement. And so we have here on the slide the particular dates, and we found that in general, we're not seeing a whole lot of conformance happening to this guidance, and it is a binding guidance. And so we are putting out some eCTD validations which will become effective this coming September, and these validations are being used to check the submissions to see, number one, do they contain study data, and if they do, if the study data is provided in particular sections of the eCTD, then is it in standardized format, when did it start, and so forth. So we have these validations here. It is really important for anyone that is submitting data to modules 4 or 5, any files to modules 4 or 5, that they read the technical rejection criteria for study data. It talks about the specific validations, the checks that are going on, and it talks about depending on what section of the eCTD your file is included under, what you'll need to do in order to pass validation. This includes placing files in those sections where you don't think you have to follow the standardized study data requirement. There may still be an action you need to take to ensure that your submission makes it through. So please read the technical rejection criteria for study data. There's also information, obviously, in our eCTD validation specification. We then have some other resources here, the study data technical conformance guide, our web page about submitting study data, and we did recently do a webinar about this as well that I encourage you to check out. The purpose of eCTD and study data requirements. Reviewing the study data in a timely manner is critical for the FDA review process. In some cases, reviewers have only 30 days to review. When sponsors submit data to the FDA in a reliable and accessible format, it improves the efficiency and consistency of the review divisions. The CDER standards that are in the FDA Data Standards Catalog, these enable FDA to streamline the review process. It reduces the time for the reviewers to locate and identify the study data. It reduces the burden on the sponsors and the reviewers from information requests. It reduces review time by enabling the use of commercial off-the-shelf reviewer tools. Here at FDA, the review offices are using JReview, Jump Clinical, and some other tools to automate the review analyses. And so they need the data to come in a standardized way. Otherwise, these tools are not effective. And this is all to support the data-driven decisions by applying data mining and data analytic techniques. This slide talks about the technical rejection criteria for study data. So the technical rejection criteria for study data provides the conditions under which FDA will not accept submissions with the study data. Beginning September 15th, submissions failing these validations will be rejected. So this table gives you a listing of these validation codes and a description, and to remind you that these will all be high severity starting September 15th of this year. The number one error that we see is 1734. That's where we see industry having the most trouble. It's really important to read this technical rejection criteria for study data, and that is because it very clearly will show you that if you're putting a file under a particular section in the eCTD, it doesn't matter what your study is. If there's a file in a particular section and it happens to have a particular extension on the file name, or it has a particular file tag associated with it, then the 1734 validation would trigger, depending on that criteria. And because of that, there will be cases where you're going to need to provide what's called a simplified trial summary file, where you're basically indicating that, yes, my file is being referenced under a TRC section in the eCTD, but it should not be subject to the standardized study data requirement. And so in that trial summary file, you're going to indicate in a code, you're going to put NA in a particular field, and that basically tells our system to no longer do any study data validation checks on these particular files. So it's really important you read the technical rejection criteria for study data so you avoid getting caught up in a rejection. Okay, enough of the guidance. So now we're going to switch over to some metrics. We're going to look at some metrics about how submissions are coming into CDER. So first, I'm going to show you a complete year. So what I'm going to show you here is the complete fiscal year 2020 for our submissions. CDER received approximately 342,000 submissions in fiscal year 2020. 85% of those were transmitted through the gateway, which is phenomenal. So you might ask, what about the other 15%? 6% came in paper, 5% on physical media, and when we say physical media, we're talking mainly about things that come in on a hard drive. Maybe a few come in on a disk. 3% were using the CDER NextGen portal, and less than 1% were coming in for email. So now let's take a look at how are we doing in the current fiscal year, 2021. And we have data that takes us all the way through June 20th, so that's about 3/4 of the way through our fiscal year 2021. So far, CDER has received approximately 249,000 submissions. And the good news here is we're going up. 90% of these submissions have been transmitted through the gateway. This is better than the 85% last year. It's probably no surprise that it's going up given all the challenges that everyone has gone through over this last year. 90% has been coming through the gateway. So what about the other 10%? Well, the news continues to be positive here. 6% is coming through the CDER NextGen portal. The CDER NextGen portal is just another type of gateway that we have here at CDER. So altogether, 96% of the submissions are coming through the internet. They're coming through our gateways, our portals, which is absolutely fantastic. Less than 1% coming through email, less than 1% are coming in on these physical media avenues. So here we look at our common submission errors. Overall, the submission rejection rate for all our electronic submissions was 1.4% over the last year. So pretty small. It's been consistent over the years. But we're going to dive in here. We're going to look at the top reasons for a rejection at CDER. So the number one reason, duplicate eCTD sequence. That's remained our number one reason for the past 5 years. We do see some improvement on it, but it's still the top reason, unfortunately. Number two, triggering a high severity eCTD validation. We run our eCTD validation checks on every eCTD submission that comes in. Number three, invalid file type. Number four, it's just simply sent to the wrong center. Your application was supposed to go to CBER, but on the gateway choice, you had selected CDER. And so the wrong center has it, and it gets rejected. And then last but not least, number five, it's just simply not an eCTD format. You've sent us a submission, say it's to an NDA. Submissions to NDAs are required in eCTD, but this submission, for whatever reason, was not, and that was the reason for the rejection there. Okay, so now we're going to dig a little deeper into here in these top five. So number one, duplicate eCTD sequence. And what we have here is, CDER is not going to process. It really can't process a sequence if the eCTD sequence number already exists under that application. So if you have submitted an eCTD sequence, say eCTD sequence number 50, to your application, and it was successfully processed into our system, If CDER receives an attempt to send another eCTD sequence to that same application and the eCTD sequence number is 50, the same sequence number we already have, it automatically rejects it. And so that's number one. Okay, as we look at number 2 on our list, triggered high severity eCTD validation error. Okay, so this we're talking about when we run your submission through our eCTD validator. These are the 3 most common errors that come up that result in a rejection. 2001, you've upgraded your M1. So you used to be on 2.01, then you got onto the latest Module 1 version, which uses DTD 3.3, but then for some reason you reverted back. You can't revert back. That causes a processing challenge for us. The next one, 2002, the XML didn't pass the validation against the schema. So, right, our schema, one of the things it has are all the standardized headings and subheadings. If you use a heading or subheading that's not from our schema, it triggers that validation error. And then 2022, the wrong submission subtype for the submission type. So we have a table in our eCTD M1 specification, and it talks about what the specific valid combinations are. Hopefully your eCTD publishing software does this automatically, but if not, you can look at our eCTD website and find those valid combinations. Okay, we move forward. Number 3, invalid file type. This is pretty simple. This is that you've sent something through the gateway, but you've sent a single file rather than a folder. When you're submitting something to CDER through the electronic submission gateway, you need to submit a folder, not a single individual file. So it's pretty simple. That's been in place for many, many years. Number 4, sent to the wrong center. Not a whole lot more to be said about this. This is simply you've sent something that's supposed to be for CBER, but when you send it through the gateway, there's a selection box where you can pick which center it should go to. The submitter had accidentally picked CDER instead of CBER. And then number 5, it's just not in eCTD format. You've submitted something to an NDA. Submissions to NDAs are required to be in eCTD, and for whatever reason, the submission that was provided is not in eCTD. And so a rejection notification is sent back citing the reason why. Here we want to call your attention to a couple of errors that we see quite a bit, and it causes a lot of problems with our reviewers being able to access the documents or just taking additional time to get the necessary documents to do the review. So these are 2 current validations. They've been in place for many, many years. 1306, no leaf element for the file. This means you've submitted the file in your sequence folder, but you haven't provided the proper reference in the backbone, meaning you haven't referenced it in the US regional or index.xml. What does this mean for the reviewer? It means when they're in our eCTD viewer tool, they don't see your file. The other one is 1323, no file for the leaf element. It means you did reference the file, so the reviewer sees the file listed in our viewer tool, but when they click on it, nothing opens. They get an error because the actual physical file wasn't included in the sequence folder. So these are 2 errors which are being upgraded to high March 1st, 2022. Okay, and finally, we're going to get to frequently asked questions here to the eSub team. Where do I place my content? Here, we're going to look at the comprehensive table of contents, headings, and hierarchy, which you can find on the eCTD website in the eCTD submission standards. We're also going to look at the M4 organization of the CTD. This has helpful information on organizing your submission as well. And then finally, if it's just not clear from either of those sources, we're going to direct you to your FDA Regulatory Project Manager to say, hey, where do you usually expect to see this type of document? Under what heading? And of course, you can always email us at esub@fda.hhs.gov with questions. All right, another one, how do I get started with eCTD? How do I request an application number? How do I get an ESG gateway account? So these questions and others, we've got them answered on our eCTD website. So on the main eCTD website page, near the bottom, you're going to see a link here, visit our Submit Using eCTD page. If you click on that, you're going to find the answers that you need to go ahead and get started if you're new to all this. All right, so I've got a couple of challenge questions to give you a little test to see how much I'm able to get through here on this presentation. So when will FDA begin rejecting submissions for failing eCTD validations listed in the Technical Rejection Criteria for study data? When's FDA going to start rejecting? Will it be September 15th, 2021, October 1st, 2021, March 1st, 2022, or FDA is already rejecting when a submission fails these validations? So I'm just going to give you a few seconds here to think about what your answer is. Okay. The answer is September 15th, 2021. That's when these TRC eCTD validations are going to be rejectable. One more question for you. Which of the following statements is not true? Is it A, even if my study is not required in standardized format, I need to read the TRC to see if a simplified TS.XBT will be required in the study's STF? Is it B, eCTD validation 1306 and 1323 will become high on March 1st, 2022? C, the old eCTD Module 1, DTD version 2.01 will no longer be supported starting March 1st, 2022? Or is it D, starting June 24th, 2021, promotional 2253 submissions to CDER will be allowed in non-eCTD format? So I'll give you just a few seconds to think about that one. Remember, which statement is not true? Okay, the answer is D. Starting June 24th, these 2253 submissions are required in eCTD format. Thank you for playing our game. All right, and here's some resource information to support your electronic submission. Any eCTD or general electronic submission questions you can send to our eSub team. Any study data submission related questions to the eData team. And anything about the promotional submissions with that guidance that's become binding and the need to send those 2253s or accelerated approval submissions in eCTD, you can contact the OPDP team at their email address here. So in summary, under electronic submission guidance, we talked about the eCTD guidance. The last update was February 2020. We also talked about that the old M1 version, DTD 2.01, will be retired March 1st, 2022. We talked about the promotional guidance, that it's now active as of June 24th, 2021, and it means that certain submission types, like the 2253 and accelerated approvals, are now required in eCTD. And important, are you submitting study data? Are you submitting files to modules 4 and 5? If you are, it's critical to read the technical rejection criteria, even if you don't think your study is required to follow standardized format, because there might be things you need to do. There might be action you need to take to ensure that your submission makes it through validation. On the submission side, we looked at the metrics, and we were pleased to be able to tell you that 96% of submissions to CDER are coming in through our gateway or portal. And we talked a bit about common eCTD errors. Number one problem that results in a rejection is reusing the same sequence number. And we also talked about that 1306 and 1323 validations are going to be raised to high severity next year, March 1st, 2022. So that concludes my presentation today, giving an electronic submission update for CDER here at FDA. I thank you very much for your time and hope you were able to take away some valuable information here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that fantastic presentation. It looks like we're starting to get more and more questions in the Q&A chat pod for you. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with our first question. So Jonathan, can we use ESG for eCTD submissions?
This is a great question. As a matter of fact, ESG should be your go-to gateway when sending in eCTD submissions to CDER. We actually have in our eCTD binding guidance, it says that when you're sending in a submission to an NDA, a BLA, an ANDA, commercial IND, drug master file, if that submission, well, number one, the submission needs to be in eCTD format. And number two, if the size of that eCTD submission is 10 gigabytes or less, you must use the ESG. So great question. So it's not only can we use the ESG for the eCTD submission, really that's the main transmission method that industry should be using for those eCTDs. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. And for the next question, what does it mean when you state this is a binding guidance? Can you explain what that means to FDA?
Right. So binding guidance. So FDA has put out what are called 745A guidances related to eCTD, related to study data, for example. And these types of guidances are different from typical guidance. So typical guidance has a lot of language in it where it says you should do something, or it's recommended to do something, or FDA would like you to do something. In a binding guidance, such as the eCTD guidance, it uses language such as you must do something. And so with a binding guidance, if you don't do something where it's saying you must do it, that's where some of these eCTD validations come in, and they're high severity. Meaning if the guidance says you must do something, FDA may have created an eCTD validation with a high severity. And what that means is when your submission comes in, if you didn't follow one of these musts in the guidance, and there's an eCTD validation for it, your submission may be rejected right at the door, right when it comes in from the gateway, before the review division even sees it. Now, of course, if you were to get an eCTD rejection, you would get what's called a technical rejection notice, and it would state on it which validation you failed and what steps you should take to resubmit so you can pass. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for the explanation. We have another question for you. Can Type 3 DMFs just be submitted through CDER NextGen portal, or do they need to be submitted in eCTD format? Which DMFs need to be submitted in the eCTD format?
Okay, so we've got a few questions wrapped up in this one. So I'll tackle the first one. Can Type 3 DMFs just be submitted through the CDER NextGen portal? The answer there is no, right? You can submit that Type 3 DMF through the CDER NextGen portal if you're sending it in non-eCTD, or you can submit that non-eCTD Type 3 DMF through the ESG gateway. If your Type 3 DMF is in eCTD format, then you'll have to use the ESG gateway. And let's see here, the other part of the question, do they need to be submitted in eCTD format? Okay, this is a good one. When it comes to DMFs, there are different types of DMFs. Currently, there are type 2, type 3, type 4, and type 5. All types of DMF, with the exception of the type 3, must be in eCTD format. With the type 3, industry has an option. They can go eCTD or non-eCTD. And yeah, I think I've covered all the questions wrapped up in that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have more questions for you. Our next one is, if study data sets were generated when the study completed, for example, 2018, but the IND or NDA is not filed until 2021, which data standards would the file be validated against? Would it be those in place when the dataset was generated or those in place when the dataset is submitted?
The requirements for submitting study data in standardized format are based on the study start date. It is not based on when you actually make your submission to the FDA or when you might be generating something. It's based on the study start date. And as you read the technical rejection criteria for study data, which I really, really hope everyone had that takeaway from my presentation. If you're including study data in your submission, you really want to read that technical rejection criteria for study data, and also the study data technical conformance guide. These get into when you need to use these standardized data standards and when, how it's determined. And that's where it gets into some clarification there, where it'll tell you following these data standards is based on the date the study began. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. We have another question. Can we use the portal for CDER?
No, unfortunately, you cannot use the portal for CDER right now. This CDER NextGen portal is pretty new in terms of being able to actually make non-eCTD submissions for these marketing applications or an IND. And right now, it's just CDER. CDER has launched this. CDER has been working constantly to improve on what we have. It could be in the future that CBER may join in, but for right now, the CDER NextGen portal is only for CDER submissions. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And our next question is, where can users find the eCTD?
You can find the eCTD guidance and the eCTD specifications on our FDA eCTD website. I believe there is a link to it in the presentation, but also it's pretty easy to remember. You can simply go to www.fda.gov/eCTD, and that will take you right to our FDA eCTD homepage. And from there, you'll find a link to a document called the eCTD Submission Standards. And this is a real key piece of information if you want to find all the specifications and valid terms and values that you can use with an eCTD submission. This eCTD document has a catalog of all the different eCTD specifications documents and has all those standards. If you're using eCTD publishing software, that publishing software should already have all of those standards and definitions baked into it. Thank you.
Okay, great. And our next question is, For master files granted a waiver from eCTD requirements, is a PDF, a non-eCTD format of submissions acceptable as an alternate format or non-eCTD hard copy?
Right. So if your DMF, if you have a DMF and you have submitted a request for a waiver from the eCTD requirement, and FDA has responded to your waiver request granting the eCTD waiver, then you can submit that DMF in non-eCTD format, and okay, so that one I heard it kind of cutting out a little bit on my end, so I don't know if other people had it cut out too. So I'm going to just repeat the question just to make sure everyone hears it. It's if my pre-IND submission used submission ID 0001 and sequences 0001 and 0002 had referenced that submission ID of 0001, then when I submit my IND original application in sequence 0003, what should the submission ID be? That's a this question gets into the weeds a little bit. It gets pretty technical, so it might go over the head of a lot of the audience. But for those that are following this, yep, you send your pre-submissions in, and you use the submission ID of that initial sequence that started all the pre-submissions. And then when you're ready to actually send in your full IND original application, and in this case they're talking about doing it with sequence 3, you would choose the eCTD submission type original, and you would use the eCTD submission subtype of application. And if you're doing that, then if the sequence number is 0003, then you're going to use an eCTD submission.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks for restating the question. Our next question is, does CDER still accept paper submissions?
Absolutely. If you're sending in a submission to CDER and it's not required to be in eCTD format, then the paper submission will still be accepted. Over the last year, we found that most people really don't want to send in paper, and they've been asking us for alternatives. And actually, a big reason the CDER NextGen portal has been enabled to receive non-eCTD submissions, as Sayum's presentation was talking about, is so that we have this capability. So if you in industry, if you're submitting, maybe it's a research IND that's not required to be an eCTD, and you used to submit it in paper, but now it's become a very burdensome task for you to go into the office to prepare a binder and put together all this paper, you can now send it in non-eCTD through the CDER NextGen portal. You could also send it in non-eCTD through ESG as well. Thank you.
Okay, great. And another question. When submitting non-clinical data to CDER for studies where SEND datasets are not required, for example, studies initiated prior to 2016, studies that are not general toxicity or CV or respiratory safety pharmacology, are simplified TSXPT files required, or are the simplified TSXPT files only needed for certain types of studies in the submission?
I absolutely love this question. This really gets right to the heart of a takeaway point that I want people to have when it comes to submitting study data starting this coming September. You know, the study data requirement has generated the need to put these eCTD validations into place. And one of these eCTD validations is looking to see if a ts.xpt file has been included with the study that's coming in. And a key point here is under what sections of the eCTD is this validation going to be looking? And here's a question. It comes in, it's basically saying, hey, I started my study prior to the standardized study data requirement, but maybe I'm putting the files in a section of the eCTD that the validation is going to check, that the TRC, that Technical Rejection Criteria for study data, that validation is going to check. Do I have to provide a trial summary file? That's what the ts.xpt file is. In general, the answer is yes. If your files are going into a section of the eCTD within Module 4 or 5 that's covered under that Technical Rejection Criteria for study data, then the validation is going to be looking for a trial summary file. Now, I can't give just a general answer. It's why it's so important to look at that Technical Rejection Criteria for study data document that we have posted on our FDA website. We have a link to it in my presentation on the study data slides. And it has the different scenarios. It'll say, are you sending this to CDER? Are you sending it to CBER? Are you putting it under this particular section under Module 4 if it's non-clinical? What's the extension on the file that you're sending in? What is the file tag that you're associating with the file? All these different parameters come into play to determine whether you need to include that ts.xpt file. And so the best way to determine if you need it is by simply looking at that Technical Rejection Criteria for study data document. And we have some additional tools as well. We have a worksheet that we've created that's there on the FDA website page. Under that page, I have a link in the presentation. There's an FDA page about submitting study data to CDER and CBER. If you click on that link, it'll bring you to a page where you can read the Technical Rejection Criteria for study data document, but it'll also bring you to some tools. One of them is a worksheet. It's like this fillable PDF form where it asks you a series of questions about your study, where you're putting it, what kind of study it is, what's the file extension, what center is it going to, and the form then tells you whether or not a trial summary file is required. So I absolutely love this question, and really the full safe answer to your question is in those documents I just talked about. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for all of those resources, Jonathan. And one last question, and this is a resource question. How do you access the SBIA webinar on the study data technical rejection criteria?
That's a great question. We have a couple of ways to access it. One way is by going to the SBIA page on FDA.gov, and that's where all the different SBIA workshops and conferences are all listed there, and the presentations are all accessible there. Another thing that we did is we provided a link directly from our eCTD webpage to the SBIA page so you could view the presentation. So on our eCTD website, there is a link where you can view our recently provided presentations relating to electronic submissions. It goes back the last few years. And you'll see our recent SBIA presentation for the TRC, and when you click on it, it'll bring you to the SBIA webpage. So you can get to it that way, or you can go directly to the SBIA page on FDA.gov. You could even do a Google search from wherever and say, SBIA, FDA, SBIA presentations into your Google search, and it's going to come back with some links to take you there if you have any trouble finding it. SBIA has really done a great job at making it easy to find these, the listings of the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan and Sayum. Thank you for all these great resources and your presentations today. We will also be posting these on YouTube after